Thank you very much for inviting us to come and speak at the Pet Behaviour Science Conference. We're going to tell you a little bit about our research with children with the aim of trying to prevent animal cruelty and also promote animal welfare amongst young people. Children and pets is an area of research which has been below the radar in psychological research and theory. And there's been a lack of focus also on the importance of children's cruelty to animals and what it might mean for their mental health. So, for example, when children attend a child and adolescent mental health clinic, even if they are asked about their behaviour towards animals, it's often not noted down in their notes. There's also concerns internationally about urban children's disconnection from nature and the impact this might be having on their attitudes and behaviour towards animals. Over the last 10 years or so, people have called for more research on the relationships between children and animals. And also, the research needs to be cross-disciplinary and very child-centred. And that's the kind of orientation that we've taken within our research group. When we look at children and animals, we find that in the UK, about 70% of children and adolescents live with pets in their household. And we've found out that pets have a really important developmental function for children. Children are highly interested and emotionally bonded with their pets, so they report loving and caring for their pets. And looking from a child's perspective, we can see that pets have a benefit to children's quality of life and their mental health. They've been implicated in better communication with family members and friends. And we know that children become really highly attached to their pets, especially dogs. And also that pet attachment is linked with humane behaviour, and that we can foster it by promoting pet care amongst children, because the foundations of attachment are close reciprocal bonds that children form with their pets through looking after their pets and caring for them. Because of this importance of pets in children's lives, we know that there is the potential for children to have real benefits for animal welfare. Children play crucial roles in animals' lives, just as the pets play a crucial role in their lives. For example, they have a caring role for many pets in the household. Children are often also the motivator to buy pets. It's usually on children's demand that families will purchase pets. We found from qualitative research led by Janine Muldoon that caring for pets in a household is quite gendered, with females tending to take more of a role in things like cleaning out small animals, and also that sometimes children report that parents can be barriers to pet care because parents are concerned about safety issues with children and possibly also with the animals. We've also discovered over a range of different studies that children have limited welfare knowledge, and that this can lead to a risk for pets because their children's lack of knowledge can influence how they interact with animals. So taking an animal welfare science perspective, in order to interact safely with animals and promote their welfare and promote positive welfare, children need to have an understanding of the 5 freedoms, so freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain and suffering, freedom to express natural behaviour, and also freedom from fear and distress. But we know young children can be quite egocentric, so caring and loving an animal might lead them to do things that are nice for children rather than nice for the animal. So, for example, it's common for children to give animals inappropriate food like chocolate to dogs, and also children's physical interactions with animals may not be to the benefit of the animal and could potentially also be a safety risk. So, for example, a young child going and hugging a dog around the neck or lying on top of a sleeping dog, which would be distressing potentially for the dog and also a bite risk for children. Turning to intentional cruelty, there's far less research internationally. In a systematic review that Roxanne and I have done with Emma Hawkins, we identified only 39 studies internationally in the published literature. We didn't have any time limits or international limits, so this was really everything that was published. And what we revealed was that cruelty, deliberate cruelty, can start young as 6 years. The estimates vary between 20 and 60%, but there is consistency in finding that intentional cruelty is more common amongst boys. Importantly, there's a range of developmental and psychological risk factors for children. So, for example, behaviour and conduct disorders were more implicated in animal cruelty. Psychopathic, callous and emotional traits and sadism were highlighted as well. Mental health difficulties, and also experience of trauma, abuse and violence. So children who've been through adverse childhood experiences, perhaps been in a family where domestic abuse is a factor of their everyday lives, these children are more at risk of intentional cruelty. Looking at Scottish SPCA figures for child cruelty in Scotland, we can see it affects all types of animals, particularly pet animals such as cats and dogs and rabbits, but also wild animals, in particular birds and swans as well. So birds seem to be particularly at risk in the Scottish context in terms of wild animals. Trying to get an understanding of children's cruelty, it's clear that we need to take a cross-disciplinary approach and in particular bring together welfare science, educational science, looking at how we teach children of different ages, how we build animal welfare into curriculums, and engaging with charities and non-governmental organisations about how they educate children. We need to understand about children's development as well, how children learn and develop concepts about animals, how their attitudes towards animals are shaped, and their emotional attachments and empathy towards animals are nurtured. And also children's physical health is important. We've already mentioned mental health, but also engaging with animal and pet care in a natural environment will have impacts on physical activity and physical health. And there's an emergence of a growing field of animal assisted interventions for children internationally. The education projects that we've carried out so far have been funded by 4 large grants. A 3-year project funded by the UK government to look at primary school children and how we can promote a duty of care to animals amongst younger populations. Scottish SPCA funded project to evaluate their prevention through education programme, which Roxanne will tell you a little bit about in a moment. A 4-year project also funded by the UK government to look at how we promote duty of care to animals among adolescents. And then more recently, a 3-year project to develop and evaluate an intervention specifically for children who've been cruel to animals, and that's called Animal Guardians. So in this talk, we're going to draw from some of these different studies. The first study we conducted nearly 10 years ago now looked at primary school children and how you can prevent a duty of care to them. And we developed a design where we had a pre-test and a post-test and a delayed post-test with an intervention group and children in school who didn't have the intervention. In total, we engaged 410 children. They were all aged 9 to 10 years old in a range of 11 schools across the Edinburgh area. And we evaluated the intervention by looking at a range of different measures, including demographic questions, but also we looked at empathy, attachment to pets, attitudes towards animals, and then knowledge of animal needs, animal welfare needs. The intervention itself, for the children who got the intervention, it was a series of 40-minute workshops. These were based heavily on educational theory around how you engage children of this age in kind of scientific learning. So they included observation activities, decision making, hypothesis testing, for example. The first session focused on animal welfare needs. The second session, the children had to view a video and then become an animal detective, trying to discover or think about the welfare of that animal. And the third session looked at who's responsible for animal welfare, and we used moral dilemma technique, which is used a lot in developmental research. All the sessions focused on pets, farm animals and wildlife because we were interested in all animals, not just companion animals. And the intervention itself was delivered by the Scottish SPCA, but the research team did the evaluation work. So this is the first workshop, very colourful and interactive, where children had a range of photos and they had to identify how the photos linked with the 5 welfare needs. The second one was where the children had to watch a short video and then they had to answer these questions by themselves. Does the animal look hungry and thirsty? Does it have a comfortable place to live? Does it look hurt or ill? Does it look free to do things that dogs do? In this case, we were looking at a dog. Does it look scared or upset? And then is there anything else you've noticed? And this is an image of, it's a still from a video we showed of a dog that was clearly unwell and not moving very much. Then in the third activity, we used real life cruelty situations or where welfare was compromised, such as this hedgehog example. On your way home from school, your friend notices a hedgehog under the football nets in the park. It's struggling to move. And the children had to discuss this dilemma. Who should do something about it? What should they do? And what should you do as a child? And the message here is that the children should go and tell a responsible adult, much the same as the child protection messages that are given to children of this age. In terms of the results, we found a change in empathy, no change in attachments or attitudes, and a slight shift in children's understanding of their responsibility for animals. But most of the main changes came in relation to knowledge. For dogs, cats, and goldfish, we found that their knowledge increased in the intervention condition compared to in the control condition, and this increase was maintained at delayed post-test. So the things that they'd learned in these simple workshops were maintained over quite a long period of time. So this is the results for the pets. We found the same for wild animals. In fact, there were slightly greater increases here because baseline knowledge of wild animals is lower. So we found an increase in knowledge, welfare knowledge for swans and for hedgehogs, who are common targets of cruelty in Scotland. And also for farm animals, we found increases for cows and for hens welfare. So the findings suggested from this first study we carried out that these interventions really do have quite a strong impact on welfare knowledge. The attitude impact was less because attitudes towards animals were high at the start. And for empathy, although there was some evidence of change, we felt that you need to do something a little bit more hands-on in order for empathy and compassion to shift. The implications of this, which we've carried through with our subsequent work, is that it's important to map on the evaluation tools to the content of the intervention, and that basically this is an area of intervention where children really enjoyed, and that it's really beneficial to work with welfare organisations and education leaders to try and change school curricula in order to get animal welfare education into schools.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Prevention Through Education project that we set up in 2014. So this project was to evaluate the education programme that the Scottish SPCA was running currently through schools across Scotland. And they wanted help to evaluate this education programme to try and understand what is working or what might not be working, and what we could do to kind of improve animal welfare education in the future. So the education programme itself, it actually reaches over 300,000 children across Scotland every single year. And this is continually being updated as well. So every year the schools can kind of choose between different workshops to take part in. So they can, every year they can kind of choose a different workshop, and it makes sure that schools are constantly engaged each year with the education programme. So there are 4 workshops altogether. So there's one focused on pet animals, one on wildlife, one on farm animals, and then there's a general animal welfare one which covers all animals. So these workshops are delivered by the education officers within the school, and sorry, I'm just going to go to the next slide. And they're about an hour each. So in terms of the actual evaluation of the education programme, what we did is the day before they took part in the education programme, they completed a paper survey which comprised of a variety of measures relating to the child-animal relationship. And then on the second day, they took part in the education programme, and then the day after, they did another survey with the same measures to see if there's any change over time. And then we also went back about 6 to 8 weeks later, so after the summer holiday, and gave them another questionnaire, which is the same one. So this was the delayed post-test. We also had a test versus control condition as well. So we had over 1,000 children in the test group and 127 children in the control group. So we could say whether the changes over time was because of the education programme itself. And we used opportunistic sampling. So we basically contacted schools and asked them if they would be interested in taking part in the research study. And these were schools that had already kind of signed up for the education programme. And then for the control schools, we had to find those that hadn't yet booked a workshop or wanted to book a workshop but had not yet received a workshop. So most of these children completed these surveys, but then perhaps a month or so later, then the school would take part in the workshops. And to analyse the data, we used mixed model ANOVAs and ANCOVAs to kind of control for kind of baseline differences. So these are the variety of measures that we used at each of the different tests. So we had knowledge of animal welfare needs and knowledge about the Scottish SPCA as well. So we thought it's important to have that knowledge of the animal welfare charities as well, because we know that's important for children reporting of cruelty incidents or an animal that is hurt or upset, they know who to call. We also looked at attitudes towards animals, attachment to pets, children's beliefs about animal minds, so whether animals have thoughts and feelings, attitudes towards animal cruelty, compassion towards animals, and also their reported humane behaviour towards animals. So when we looked at the results, we analysed each of the workshops separately so we could see whether one of the workshops was working better than another one. And what we found was very similar to previous intervention studies, that knowledge was the easiest to change. So we can see that each of the different workshops, they all led to increased knowledge about animals and animal welfare. And they also increased knowledge of the Scottish SPCA. So the children were able to recall things like the telephone number or what the Scottish SPCA did. And then for two of the workshops, so You and Your Pet and the Food and Farm Animal Welfare workshops, the children also increased their beliefs about animal minds. And we think this might have been because these two workshops placed a greater emphasis on animal sentience, and also they showed more kind of images and animal cruelty scenarios. So really kind of getting the children to think about the animal's perspective. So we feel that that was really important to kind of include in future interventions as well. We found improvements in the other measures, however, these weren't significantly different compared to the control group. So we found differences in compassion, humane behaviour, attachment and attitude, so they all improved, and the attitudes towards cruelty decreased, but this wasn't significant. So the next part of the project was to develop some iPad games that could be incorporated into the education programme for the following years. So we actually developed 3 different games, so one focusing on pet animals, and one on wildlife, and one on farm animal welfare. And we conducted pilot evaluations of each of these in schools. So you can see in the picture some of the children playing these games on iPads. So the one that I'm going to talk about just now is the pet welfare game, and this was developed using Articulate Storyline. So Jo showed you this image at the start of the presentation, so I just wanted to highlight that if we look at the domestic animals, we can see that cats, dogs and rabbits are the targets for animal cruelty in childhood. So we thought for the pet welfare game, it was important to focus on these kind of 3 domestic animals that were the targets for cruelty. So we developed a logic model to help us with the design of the intervention. So for the target, we wanted to aim for children between 7 and 12 years, so in primary school. And it was for the general population, so any child within schools in Scotland could take part in this. The intervention ran on an iPad in classes. It was a one-off session that lasted around 15 minutes. And the aim was to promote positive child-animal interactions. And so it comprised of 3 different levels. So number 1 was animal sentience, so teaching children about thoughts and feelings of animals and how to recognise emotions in animals. The second level was animal welfare needs, so really focusing on the 5 freedoms. And then the third level was about behaviour impact on animals, so appropriate and safe behaviours that children can do towards animals. In terms of the mechanisms, we wanted to increase children's understanding of animal sentience and ability to recognise emotional signals. We wanted them to understand what animals need to be happy and healthy, and also understand the impact of human behaviour towards pets. And then by increasing this understanding, we hope to come to the following outcomes. So these were really similar to the outcomes that we used for the Scottish SPCA evaluation. So beliefs about animal mind, knowledge about animal welfare, but we also had increased knowledge of appropriate and safe behaviour as well. We also included the compassion measure and lower acceptance of cruelty to pets. And we thought it'd be important to look at moderation factors as well. So controlling for things like age, gender, having pets, whether they liked pets, and baseline knowledge, because we knew that these would all have an impact on their kind of baseline scores. So I'm just going to show you some of the images from the game. So this was level 1, so they had to click on the dog to begin. It had different sounds and things moved around on the screen as well, so it's quite interactive. This is an example of the first level. So children were shown an image of an animal, so a cat, rabbit or dog, and they had to decide what emotion that animal was displaying. So in this case, if they clicked on angry and click submit, then they'd get some feedback. So for example, if it was a dog in pain, they would receive this feedback. And it was really simple language that all children would be able to understand. And for every right answer, they gained points to make it a little bit more fun and interactive. If they got an answer wrong the first time, they were allowed to try again and they had a second go. If they got it wrong a second time, they would just get the feedback at the end and they wouldn't gain any points. This was the second level, so we gave them different options such as vet, hutch, outdoor run, chocolate, and they had to drag and drop these onto different icons, so whether to keep it, so that was good for the animal, or whether to bin it, so that would be bad for the animal. And this level actually came out as the level that the children most enjoyed in the feedback as well. So we think these interactive touchscreen activities are really important for kind of future interventions. And then at the end of that level, they got feedback about the 5 animal welfare needs as well. Then the third level was about appropriate and safe behaviour towards animals. So again, they could click on the animal to take them to the level. They got a question such as, should you approach a dog you don't know? And they had a yes or no answer, and then click submit, and then they got the feedback again. So again, that's the feedback, and that star would shine and spin, and they would gain some points. And then at the end, they got a kind of overview of what are the key things that they've learned from the game. And then they could click on see my results, and that would take them to the screen that showed them how many points they gained. They could also click on review quiz, so they could see each of their answers that they got right or which ones they got wrong, and they could have another go if there was time. So for the evaluation, we use a very similar method as the Scottish SPCA evaluation. So using child-friendly questionnaires, we use a pre-test and a post-test, so the day before and then 2 days after the intervention. We had a test group and a control group, and again we use opportunistic sampling. So we had 92 test children and then 92 control children. And again, we analysed it using mixed model ANOVAs and ANCOVAs. So the measures that were used, some of them were slightly adapted from the original measures just so they were more orientated towards the different pet animals. So we used beliefs about pet minds. So this was really specific to dogs, cats and rabbits. And we used the same compassion measure. And we also used the same attitudes towards animal cruelty, but again, we tailored this towards the pets that were in the game. And then we had this extra question as well about knowledge about appropriate and safe behaviour towards animals, so to see if they remembered these important lessons from the game. Then for knowledge about the animal welfare needs, we gave them an image in the questionnaire so they could write their answers around the dog or the cat or the rabbit, and then we could code that for the different 5 freedoms. So they got a total score for each of the 5 freedoms, but then a total score overall as well. And so when we looked at the results, we found more significant differences than we did for the traditional education programme. So we found increased knowledge of the 5 freedoms for animals, increased knowledge of appropriate and safe behaviour towards animals, increased beliefs about pet minds, and decreased acceptance of cruelty to pets. So again, it's really easy to kind of promote the kind of cognitive factors underlying child-animal relationships. But again, we didn't find a difference for compassion. So we're still having trouble finding out ways of promoting compassion towards animals through these education programs within schools. So like I said, knowledge has been the easiest to change, and we found that across the different interventions that we've done, but it's also consistent with other interventions that others have done across the world. So very, very similar, that knowledge is coming out the key thing that changes through education. It was really positive that we increased knowledge about appropriate and safe behaviour, because we know that, like Jo said earlier, most cruelty in childhood is actually accidental, and it's because they lack the knowledge they need to treat animals appropriately. But we still don't know how this might translate into real life behaviour. So we can test their knowledge, but without the kind of behaviour observations and long-term follow-up, we don't really know whether this will have a real impact on their direct behaviour towards the animals. So again, we found benefits for belief in animal minds. So especially for the iPad game, we made sure that there was a level that really focused in on the emotions of animals. And we found a significant difference for this. So we think that it is important to focus education on increasing children's understanding of animal emotions and how to recognise those. And we know that this is a really important skill to have because it relates to empathy and treatment of animals as well. The iPad game is also effective at decreasing acceptance of animal cruelty. And this is really important as well because in a different study that we've conducted, we found that these cruelty attitudes actually predicted cruelty behaviour. So this is a kind of more ethical way of looking at children's orientations towards animal cruelty without asking them really sensitive and difficult questions about animal cruelty. So in terms of compassion, we haven't been able to change this through kind of traditional education methods in schools, but perhaps we need more direct contact with animals so the children have an opportunity to actually spend time for animals, caring for them, and the opportunity to kind of form a bond or attachment with them, because we know that facilitates humane behaviour towards them. But it could also be that actually compassion was really high at baseline, so there's very little movement for it to improve because this was in the general population, and these children, they loved animals and they had really high compassion at baseline. Whereas if we look at a subsample of children who have perhaps, gone through adversity and perhaps have disrupted attachment or compassion towards animals, we might have found something different. So in terms of the education programs, they're brilliant for increasing knowledge of animal welfare and preventing accidental cruelty, but perhaps they might be more orientated towards the general population. So some of the newer work is looking again at the digital interventions and technology, but then also focusing on children who have been deliberately cruel to animals. So I'm going to hand back over to Jo and to talk about some of the current work that's happening here at Edinburgh.
Okay, thank you, Roxy. We have a range of exciting new projects, and building on the work that we've done so far, we're particularly interested in how we can promote these more affective or emotional sides of bonds between children and animals, and also how we can find out more about the children who are particularly at risk of cruelty, and how we can try and work with those children to prevent them from continuing their cruel behaviour. So one way that we've been moving ahead and building on the benefits that we've found with the iPad games and the fact that the children absolutely loved them is to continue to work with the Scottish SPCA, but explore the roles that mechanical toys and robotics toys might have in trying to engage children in that more effective bond with the animals in school-based educational interventions. So we've developed a small intervention called Rabbit Rescuers. And the aim of this intervention was to do something with very young children. The work that we'd done previously had been with children who were kind of above 8 years, focusing on the upper end of primary school. But the Scottish SPCA was really keen to work with children when they just first start school. So we developed an intervention which included animal toys in order to try and create a more interactive experience for the children. So we worked with 123 children aged 5 to 7 in one school. Similar to our previous studies, there was a baseline pre-test which was done by interviews this time, and then after the intervention there was a post-test. The pre and post test included all the measures that we've built up over the years and that we know are important in trying to promote animal welfare with children. So we looked at their beliefs in animal minds and sentience, their understanding of animal welfare needs around the 5 freedoms, their emotional attachment to the animals, and their attitudes towards cruelty, because as Roxy said, that does seem to be something that we've uncovered as a really important predictor of animal cruelty. The children were placed into one of 3 intervention conditions. The first was with a mechanical toy. This is the toy here. It was a robotic toy, well, a mechanical toy that squeaked, moved and jumped and its ears flapped. So it wasn't completely interactive. It did these kinds of activities regardless of what the children did. And then there was a fluffy rabbit, which was a non-mechanical toy rabbit, but was very soft and cuddly. And we tried to match them as far as we could and make them life-size. And then the third group of children had no intervention, so they just had the pre-test and the post-test, but they were given the activity after the study was finished. So all of the children involved did get an opportunity to do the intervention. The actual activity involved a range of different activities for children of this age, and they were designed to teach about sentience, so to be able to recognise emotions in rabbits. We taught them about welfare needs specific to rabbits, and we also taught them about pet care. So, for example, we gave them information about the size of the hutch and run, about the kind of vet care that rabbits need, and a variety of other information about rabbit care. The activities were structured over a 5-day period. So during a 1 week, one week in school, children got activities every day during that week, starting with knowledge about rabbit sentience and then moving on to welfare needs and then building up to the kinds of pet care that's important so that rabbit welfare needs are met. The idea of the 5 days of activity was that we could build upon and consolidate knowledge. It would allow children time for internal reflection on their learning, and it also gave quite a large focus to the intervention because it wasn't just a one-off activity, it was an intervention that was a whole week activity. It was delivered by teachers. We supplied them with a handbook which had been developed in collaboration with the Scottish SPCA. Within this, we gave the teachers information about learning outcomes, information about rabbit welfare so that they have the knowledge they needed to teach that knowledge, and then a step-by-step guide to the activities for each day. And the aim of this was to standardise delivery and to gain some teacher feedback on how they felt it went and how easy it would be for teachers to deliver animal welfare interventions. The results showed, using a three-way ANOVA, we looked at the effect of time, that's pre-test to post-test, the effects of the intervention, that's whether the children were in the mechanical toy, the fluffy toy, or the control group. And we also looked at age effects because we had 5 and 6 to 7-year-olds involved. And basically, the key findings were that there was an improvement in welfare knowledge across the 2 intervention conditions, but not the control group, improvement in sentience, improvement in attitudes towards cruelty, but also, importantly, because we haven't managed to change this in previous studies, improvement in attachment to pets and in particular rabbits. There was also an intervention condition effect where on most variables the mechanical toy led to greater improvement than the fluffy toy, but the fluffy rabbit did lead to more gains in attachment. So we think the act of cuddling and stroking the cuddly toy was probably really important in promoting that sense of emotional attachment towards rabbits. And across all the key variables, the control group showed no change. So we found that both of the intervention effects, the mechanical rabbit and the fluffy rabbit, were more effective than no intervention. And this is just giving you some idea of the scale of the changes. So this is rabbit welfare, the soft toy is the pink line, and the mechanical toy is the green line. So you can see that both interventions have improved much more than the control. Attachment scores, they went up, but especially for the soft toy condition. Sentience scores, these were coded inversely, so a decrease from pre to post was an improvement in child sentience understanding. And here you can see the mechanical toy improved the most, and the cruelty, attitudes towards cruelty scores, they improved the most amongst the mechanical toy. So it's a fairly consistent series of findings, and we're in the process at the moment of writing this up for publication. And I think adding the kind of soft interactive toy or a mechanical fluffy toy seemed to be really important in touching on the aspects of child-animal interactions that we haven't touched on with the previous interventions. So the conclusions for this study are that mechanical toys seem to be really effective in engaging children with animal welfare education, but even just encouraging children to play with fluffy toys or using them in educational interventions could be helpful. The next steps that we're embarking on are to try and develop robots specifically for animal welfare education interventions with children. And these robots, the advantage of robots is, unlike using real live animals where there may be negative welfare implications for live animals in some situations, especially if children have a history of being cruel to animals, or it's in a school context which can be very kind of lively and potentially distressing for a live animal. Robotic animals save all of those problems, and they can also be used for animal assisted interventions. So this example here is a robotic seal, Paro, that's been developed in Japan and is used primarily with elderly populations. Evidence has shown that this has a soothing effect and some mental health benefits for the elderly. It's not completely appropriate for children for a number of reasons, and from a welfare point of view, it's a seal, and we feel that it would be much more important to kind of create robots of animals that children are likely to be able to engage with safely, whereas the general welfare message with seals is that if you see a baby seal, you should leave the seal alone and just report its welfare if required. The next project I'm going to talk a little bit about is the Animal Guardians project. This is joint with the Scottish SPCA. During our other research, we've revealed that although the majority of children, if they harm animals, it's accidental harm, there are a minority where there's deliberate animal cruelty, and we felt there was a real need to reach these children. It's an area internationally where there isn't much work being done, so it's an extremely novel type of intervention. It's funded by a charity called the R.S. MacDonald Trust, and it's for 3 years, and at the moment we're just at the end of the first year. So the intervention's been developed and piloted, and we've created a referral system, which I'll say a little bit about. It's based on a one-to-one intervention over 6 or more sessions, and these are delivered by the Scottish SPCA to children individually who've been referred because of cruelty to animals. And we're working with an absolutely brilliant PhD student, Laura, who's going to be helping us with the evaluation of this project. It's based on a logic model derived from the previous Scottish SPCA work that Roxy's told you about. We're still focusing on primary school age children. It will be used as part of the Scottish SPCA education programme, but this time it's targeted at children who've been referred for animal cruelty. The intervention, as I said, is one-to-one sessions with an aim to prevent further cruelty and to allow children to reflect on why they've been cruel to an animal before and what might have triggered it. There's 4 levels of activity. The first are activities that try and promote animal emotion recognition and an understanding of animal minds and sentience. Then we have activities which focus more on animal welfare need recognition. And then the third level is all about responsible and appropriate behaviour towards animals. In a 4th level in this activity, to try and build in the real life experience of interacting with animals, we also take children to the Scottish SPCA Rehoming Centre, and they engage in a range of animal care activities which are matched with the kind of cruelty incident that they've been referred for. So, for example, if the cruelty involved a dog, the activities in the Rehoming Centre will be around dogs. If the cruelty involved a wild bird, then the Rehoming Centre activities will involve birds. The change mechanisms, again, building on the work we've done with typically developing children who haven't been cruel to animals, it's to increase understanding of sentience and to improve emotion recognition. This may be challenging for some of the children in this programme because some of the children have developmental disabilities which might impair their empathy and emotion recognition. We're trying to improve animals' understanding of welfare needs and also to try and improve their behaviour towards animals. And the outcomes, we're using a similar range of measures that we've used before, but tailored more to the individual developmental abilities of the children. So we're measuring their beliefs about animal minds, their increased knowledge of animal welfare, increased knowledge of appropriate and safe behaviour towards animals. We're looking at compassion as well, and also their acceptance of cruelty to pets as a predictor of whether they will continue to be cruel to animals or not. And in terms of the things that may affect these outcomes, obviously the age and experience of the children are important, their gender, their mental health, and also developmental disabilities. And I'll say a little bit more about the kind of profiles of the children who are referred in a moment. The referral system has led to 30 children so far being referred to animal guardians. These children are slightly special cases. They're not completely typical of the normal population of children their age. So we've had referrals through Bernardo's, which is a charity for children, especially looked after and accommodated children, educational psychologist referrals, referrals from child and adolescent mental health services within our NHS system. We've had some referrals from residential care home settings for children who are no longer living with their original family. School referrals have been the greatest, where schools have contacted us to refer children. Some cases have come in through cruelty cases that have been reported to the Scottish SPCA helpline, and then we have 5 referrals through social work. So we've had to reach out to a range of different professional organisations who work with vulnerable children in order to identify children who may benefit from this intervention. Looking again at the children who are coming through, the majority, 22 of the children are boys and 8 are girls. And the age range has gone broader than the original aim of the project. So the youngest child with quite a serious case of cruelty was 4, and this child had already killed several animals. The eldest case is a 14-year-old who, again, is quite a serious case of cruelty. But the cluster is around 7, 8 and 9, and this fits with previous literature on when there's a kind of the first peak in childhood cruelty to animals. So the message from the referrals has very much been that the children have been slightly more extreme cases of cruelty, and there's a wider age range that we need to cater for than was originally considered when we set up the project. We've also looked at the reason for referral. The majority of cases are rough handling. This can be very, very rough handling. So it can be consistent, deliberate rough handling of pets in a household. And we have some cases of where wild animals or even farm animals have been affected. We have some children who have killed at least one animal. For example, a child who deliberately killed 2 kittens, quite a young child, another child who deliberately killed a whole group of ducklings, and also, sort of some of the cases that we've had have been slightly more extreme than even we were expecting, which highlights there's a real need to understand when intentional cruelty happens, so that we can support these highly vulnerable children who are engaged in cruelty. We had 2 cases also where an animal was harmed but did not die, and these are extreme, very extreme cases. So, for example, a case of a cat being pushed down a toilet U-bend with an implement. The cat survived, but it was a deliberate and very harmful act to the animal. So it's clear that in these cases, the welfare of the animals are being compromised. To give you a flavour of the research that we're engaged in with these children, in this first year, we've been doing qualitative interview study with the children. We've been analysing the referrals, and I've given you a little bit of information about the referrals that we've had so far. And 10 children have volunteered to be interviewed. So we're trying out different interview techniques to enable children to discuss this very, very difficult, stigmatised topic. When a child is cruel to an animal, it can have major implications on how they're treated by other people. So there is a tendency to hide this information and to not want to discuss it. So we're trialling different interview techniques to try and further this area of research forward, so that we can make recommendations to other projects about how you might engage with children who have been cruel to an animal or are highly at risk of it. The formal evaluation of the interview will take a similar process as we've taken before, where we will be doing a pre-test and a post-test, and we'll also be looking at on-task activities, so how children progress through the different sessions that they have. We'll be comparing the intervention group with a waiting list control and using a much wide array of psychological assessments, including not just human-animal interaction variables, but also psychological measures, as well as behavioural assessments. And this formal evaluation starts in January. So future directions and conclusions. I think we've shown through a range of studies over the last 10 years that typically developing children can really benefit from animal welfare education, and that it has a positive impact on their knowledge and understanding of animal sentience. In a digital age, becoming more digital and using iPads and mechanical toys can really foster and enhance these outcomes. But we also need to focus on the children who are difficult to reach, who are doing behaviours that we're all really concerned about, and Animal Guardians is a step towards that. We need further research in web-based and robotic interventions, which we're currently working on, interventions for adolescents where cruelty may be more of a group activity. We need to focus on specific target groups. For example, through Animal Guardians, we've seen a number of children with autism who've been referred, and they may need specific types of intervention that are tailored towards their needs. We also need to focus on longer term behaviour change outcomes and other longer term impacts, because most of the research we've done, even when we've done a long term follow up, it's really just still looked at attitudes and knowledge rather than behaviour, and they've often been quite short term. So, for example, a 2-month or 6-week follow up. We're continuing this research here in Edinburgh. We're looking at child development and health and the impact of pets on that, different ways of preventing and dealing with cruelty amongst children, and we're also doing research on animal assisted interventions. Thank you very much for allowing us to present to you, and we hope that you've really enjoyed our talk.